Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have 2 young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. So Sean, welcome to Better Than We Found It. It's great to have you here. I will give you a chance to give a little overview in a second. But for those who don't know, Better Than We Found It is a podcast dedicated to engaging with purpose-driven leaders. And it's brought to you by GS2. We're a talent solutions firm, and we focus on connecting sustainably conscious leaders with sustainably conscious organisations. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Sean MacHale. Sean, it'll be great if you could give a bit of overview of who you are, your role and remit, and then we'll go back and tell your story.
Sure. Josh, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. Sean MacHale is my name. I'm a partner here at EY, where I head up our Irish CCAS practice, which is just an acronym for Climate Change and Sustainability Services. I'm a dad. I come from the west of Ireland, and I have a deep passion for sustainable finance.
Well, great. Well, let's dive into that then. So, a lot of the people I've engaged with and spoken to on this podcast so far have had, I suppose, moments in their early life or even childhood where sustainability has really come to the fore. So, tell us a bit about your childhood growing up in Ireland. Whereabouts in Ireland are you from originally, and what was childhood like?
Sure. So I'm from the west of Ireland, from Mayo, a small town called Ballina. I guess I would think of my childhood as being an atypical, very happy childhood. I have a number of brothers and sisters. The one thing that I suppose that sticks out for me is the whole community piece. Sport. We're sports mad in Mayo. We love our football. But it was really kind of community. So we know everyone. We know all our neighbours. We know all the old folk who live around us. And that sense of community is very much still there today. And of course then we show it through sport, in particular Gaelic football, and I was fortunate to play with my old club for a very short spell as well. But very, very happy childhood. Lived in the country and didn't know a whole lot about nature because I never really looked at it. Too busy doing other things. And I went to the local school. Still have a lot of good friends at home, and still fortunate to have my mum and dad both with us.
Excellent. So I was going to say, as you said, football to begin with, whether that was what maybe you call it soccer or the Gaelic football. So, but you said you played for Mayo?
No, not Mayo. A couple of my friends did. I just played with the local club, which is Ballina Stephenites.
Oh, okay, fine. And I have to admit, I don't know much about it. So, what positions do they have? Positions? Watching it from afar, I don't really know what goes on.
They do. The best way to think about it looks crazy to someone that hasn't seen it before, but it's like a cross between rugby and soccer. So they have backs and forwards in the main, and a goalie, of course. So I used to spend a lot of time in the forwards, even though I'd never really had the scoreline to show. the show afterwards, but that's where I played, normally wing forward and that. But at home we played from the age of 4 upwards, and I said I was lucky enough to kind of play a couple of years senior with the local club as well. And very fortunate to make some great friends through it. Which I think is, what sport is all about. For sure.
So you said that you had other focus perhaps than nature at that point in your childhood. But was it something that was, I don't know, spoken about at home or considered at all at that stage of your life?
Yeah. So my dad or my granddad had a farm, a very, very small holding. You're looking at kind of 30 acres or so, kept a couple of cattle. Funnily enough, my dad has it today as a hobby and that. So I think it was there. It was just that we never really thought about it much. But I think, what resonates now is maybe that, you're a custodian of the land and it's all about trying to improve it. Nature is important. And certainly maybe in the last 10 years, not me because I'm not green fingered in that. But I see kind of, things that my dad would have done in terms of letting certain areas go back to nature, allow it to kind of, rewild and so forth. So I think it was always there. I think, being around animals, you kind of seen the commercial side of it in terms of them being bought and sold, but also you see the attention, the huge amount of care that's there for them as well. Country life is good life. You're on the fresh air. And it's good fun. I guess it's only now that you probably appreciate it, given that I live in a city.
Yes.
Then certainly it was there, and I think the other thing was community. Where my grandparents lived, it was called a visiting house. So even when they're in their 80s, you would have people in their 20s calling in, guys off the local football team who were our opposition, all the way through, and met some fantastic, interesting characters. And that's a real sense of kind of community and inclusiveness. Sure, I think is really what's important.
So, what's a visiting house? Is that like a so it's like a Airbnb sort of?
No, it's just a house, but it's a house that people generally call into, that you don't have to be invited. So the neighbours are just rambling for a cup of tea and that, and at any hour of the day or night, there could be 3 or 4 people there. So that's actually continued today. So the house is still there. Unfortunately, they both passed away, but my uncle now lives there. So again, if I rang him now, there could be 2-3 people in the house having a chat and that. So great sense of community and a very wide age profile as well. He's in his 60s, but he has kids who are in their 30s, and but you could get a 5-year-old in there as well with their mum or dad or whoever. So yeah, and of course it's all things sport,
Sure, absolutely, yeah. And early on with your grandparents having the farm, were you roped into doing early morning farm yard duties, or how did that go?
I was, but I mean, I have to be very honest, I was useless. I think if my grandfather was still around, he was, he didn't see me as a farmer, and that's for sure. So yeah, I might have the odd time when I was visiting him and that helped out, but it'd be very loose help. I think I wasn't really dependable in terms of early morning starts, nor was I much good. So, I think I definitely wouldn't have made it in the wonderful world of farming.
Sure. So then perhaps rightly so, you went down a bit more of a traditional pathway. So tell us a bit about what you studied at university, and I suppose how clear you were in your aspirations then, or your career aspirations, and on the path you wanted to take when you made that choice of the study at uni.
Sure. So I guess like a lot of people, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I decided to do a kind of a general degree. So I did a Bachelor of Commerce in University College Galway. And I really enjoyed that. So it was only 2 hours from home, but I was 18 when I moved out of home. Went to live in Galway, which is a good sized city. So enjoyed that immensely and made tons of good friends. Really embraced college life, maybe overdid it slightly on occasion. But it was a great learning, both in terms of personal development, because you're away from home. You have to fend for yourself, and also academically. And we got exposed to lots of different ideas through the different faculties. And as I said, met some fantastic and wonderful people whilst I was there, many of whom I'm still in touch with.
Sure. And then from uni into the world of work and into financial services, tell us a bit about those early years in the financial service industry, obviously pre-global financial crisis. What was it like, and what were the roles that you started with? Yeah,
so at the time, it was a kind of a very linear pathway. So I went through the graduate recruitment program, ended up going to London on a trading floor, where I was a trainee dealer for a number of years, and obviously progressed through that system. Fantastic time, learned a huge amount, both in terms of the industry, in terms of risk, trading, financial management, customers, but also learned a lot about people as well. And really, I think in those formative years, I was extremely fortunate to work with some fantastic people who took an interest in me, who invested time and effort in me, and who really helped me develop professionally and personally as well. So that's where I started. So it gave me a super foundational course. Hours were very, very long, but I really, really enjoyed it, and again made some great friends.
Sure. So you started with Bank of Ireland, is that right? Was it
actually NAB's trading program?
Oh, okay, fine.
Bank of Ireland. Fine,
understood. And what do you think? Because I looked at your career and the success that you had. It developed quite rapidly, I suppose. What were some of the reasons, or what would you put that success down to? You mentioned some of those leaders, but it would be great to understand, I suppose, if there are any things that you felt really helped and aided that progression and development within your career.
So I think it was two things. One is I'm super curious and I like to learn. So I'm always trying to, understand things and learn more. And that's been with me from an early age. But I think, having really, really good mentors helped me be confident, to give me a confidence that maybe I didn't have. So it did two things. I think the first thing was that they facilitated me making mistakes. And one of the great things I'll always take with me is don't be afraid to make a mistake. It's only by making mistakes that we really learn and we can start to move the dial. The other thing that I took as advice was to own the mistake. So when you do make a mistake, own it. And really then what that enabled me to do maybe was to be more confident in terms of my dealings with bigger clients, to do bigger transactions, and to really start to drive the business in a different way. And of course, these things don't go unnoticed. I was approached then to move to Barclays. They were setting up a new desk. And that brought me into a whole new world from Bank of Ireland. So, when I think of Bank of Ireland, a fantastic place to work. But obviously, it works in a different geography. Barclays is more global. So went to Barclays. Again, learned a lot. And I think that was really one of the attractions for me. Coupled with, of course, I found another great mentor whilst I was there. And again, was doing quite a good job there, and got approached by HSBC to join them to set up their markets business. And I had an absolute fantastic time there. It really, I think, it was one of the most enjoyable times of my life from a working perspective.
Sure. So we'll rewind a little bit. So the graduate program, and then into Bank of Ireland, and then that approach to Barclays. So firstly, what were you spoke about the fact that it went from perhaps slightly more local to something that was global with Barclays, but what did you find as other differences in the cultures as you made that initial transition across?
Sure. So I think if I was, Bank of Ireland to me was always very customer focused, relationship driven, good place to learn. People spent time with you and really helped you develop. Barclays, I think, was much more solutions focused, global. It was quite innovative as well. So really, there was a kind of change in lens and a change in pace as well. So I think, it moved from kind of maybe more customer relationship focused to more solutions, execution and innovation focused at Barclays. And I think then HSBC was actually a marriage of the two. So, you were taking, a lot of innovation, huge firm, huge resources, really customer driven. And of course, a great place to learn and expand. Some super people there who are still there today. Sure.
You said something about at your first firm and then at Barclays, you had a mentor quite early on. Was that something you were did you proactively get that, or was that a program internally that they had? Because I talk a lot to individuals I engage with on a day-to-day basis about having a mentor and seeking that out. But what would you say are some of the practical tips as to how to do that and make sure that works?
Yeah, I think that happened by accident. So it was never a formalized thing that, HR, can I have a mentor, please? Yeah. And they go out and find you one. It was more that I was very, very inquisitive and I kept asking a lot of questions. And from a solutions perspective, so I wasn't asking just to kind of find the answer. It was more to kind of drive the solution in that. And what I found was that, my boss at the time, who I'm thinking of in terms of the mentor, he was very, very willing to give me space. So if I thought something, would make money and was a good idea, he was very willing to facilitate it, to help me execute upon it and that. And really that kind of mentorship in terms of allowing me grow, allowing me take on new types of clients and start to drive the business. So it was really from that perspective. He also kind of taught me things around, customers and customers engagement and that, which again, to this day I find quite useful. So again, it was really, really impactful, let's say, from that perspective, but it wasn't a formalized arrangement, or indeed it wasn't something that came out of a HR type endeavor. In HSBC, he's still a mentor of mine today. He's the global head of sustainability actually for Europe, or sorry, the EMEA head of sustainability for Europe. And again, what I found there was someone, again, who was helping me develop personally, a guy who would put time and effort into you and still does today. We have some fantastic conversations on all sorts of things and that. But really at that time, it was about growing the business and doing it in a very collegiate way. And of course, bringing something different to the market. So bringing some innovation and trying to bring the depth and scale that HSBC has. But I suppose from an advice perspective is find people that you admire, and I think also find people that you believe you'll learn something from. Would be the two things that I would say to anyone that's looking for a mentor in terms of.
So Sean, welcome
criteria.
to Better Than We Found It. It's great to have you here. I will give you a chance to give a little overview in a second. But for those who don't know, Better Than We Found It is a podcast dedicated to engaging with purpose-driven leaders. And it's brought to you by GS2. We're a talent solutions firm, and we focus on connecting sustainably conscious leaders with sustainably conscious organisations. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Sean MacHale. Sean, it'll be great if you could give a bit of overview of who you are, your role and remit, and then we'll go back and tell your story.
Sure. So it was really at Danske Bank, and obviously, Nordics, they just live and breathe sustainability. It's part of the DNA and the culture and that. But it was around the time when we've seen central banks and debt management offices, so basically sovereigns, starting to issue green bonds. So that obviously caught my interest because obviously we have clients in that category.
Well, great. Well, let's dive into that then. So,
first transaction in the space,
a lot of the people I've engaged with and spoken to on this podcast so far have had, I suppose, moments in their early life or even childhood where sustainability has really come to the fore. So, tell us a bit about your childhood growing up in Ireland. Whereabouts in Ireland are you from originally, and what was childhood like?
And that wasn't the case. And it was really when we seen the depth of the market, how asset managers in particular were really viewing sustainability criteria and ESG, of course, and that I suppose opened my eyes to the potential here that sustainable finance actually will become mainstream finance, and that we'll actually end up pivoting towards that. But it was really, from the roadshows, meeting the very, very large investors and seeing what they were doing in the space that really kind of caught my attention and interest.
Excellent. So I was going to say, as you said, football to begin with, whether that was what maybe you call it soccer or the Gaelic football. So, but you said you played
absolutely. So I think
for Mayo.
Back then it was in a bond format was the first thing. So how do we get corporates access to that type of market?
Okay, fine. And I have to admit, I don't know much about it. So what positions do they have? Positions? I mean, watching it from afar, I don't really know what goes on.
And so forth, and really driving the transition, because at the end of the day, these funds should be used to make us and bring us to a low carbon economy. So does it really drive transition? Are the funds being utilised in the correct way, and are they associated impacts measurable, quantifiable, and doing the right things that those investors expect to do? So a huge amount of different issues, both in terms of, let's say, KPIs, all the way through then to how do we make this broad and general. So how do we move it from wholesale funding all the way through and bring it down to
For
the
sure,
retail
for sure.
space.
So you said
Because,
that you had other focus perhaps
no
than
doubt
nature
it'll
at
be
that point
a whole of
in
economy effort,
your
and whole of
childhood.
economy means retail
but
all the way up.
But was it
to
something that
institutional.
was,
So again, how do we
I don't
start
know,
to do
spoken
those
about
things?
at home
And of
or
course, no
considered
different today,
at
how do we
all
continue
at
to
that
scale
stage
in
of
an
your
appropriate
of
way?
your life?
And then, of course,
or-
how do we develop new product sets off that? Sure. So I think the first thing was that the management team really bought into it. They really seen the long-term potential. So they took a long-term view in terms of size of the market potential, the revenue generation capability from it and that. And in that way, then that got us alignment. So we were able to align with all the different key component areas. But it was really management being really good, strong managers and having the foresight to resource it up and to make that area investment that really placed us in a very, very strong position. Of course, then, when we started to think this through, of course, we naturally pivoted towards, well, we need to expand this out. How do we do that? And then how do we work in a collegial way? Because no one entity or organization is going to solve this. So how do we work with global organizations? How do we work for, let's say, not-for-profits, governmental agencies, and so forth? And how do we create those standards? So there was a fantastic understanding of what needed to be done. And there was also a fantastic understanding that we'd have to put our shoulders to the wheel to get it done.
So what's a visiting house? Is that like
so
it's like a Airbnb
but
sort
let's
of
resource it properly. Let's hire people. Let's upskill other people, and let's make sure that it's a whole of firm approach. And I think by doing that, that's when we could start seeing economies of scale, and also start seeing deal flow, revenue, etc., and growing it out as a business in its own right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. And what and early on with your grandparents having the farm, were you roped into doing early morning farmyard duties, or how did that go?
Sure. Yeah. I think there was a mix. I think you'll always get, very progressive firms who embrace it and they see it, and see the potential
Sure.
of it.
So,
Equally,
so
there's
then,
other firms
perhaps, rightly so, you went down a
specifically
bit
don't
more of a
want to be leaders,
traditional
and they
pathway.
see
So,
their
so tell us a bit
strategies in a
about
different place.
what
So
you
I think
studied at
more of an
university,
education
and
curve,
I suppose
with
how
those types of
how clear you
entities.
were in your
And
aspirations
again,
then, or
that's
your
part
career
and parcel of
aspirations,
any
and
sort
on
of
the
change
path you
program.
wanted to take
So it
when
was
you made
critical
that
that you would
choice
show the
of the
benefits.
study at uni.
And to me, this is something that we continue to work on today. But maybe back to your earlier point, I also think it depends in terms of what lens you want to look this through, and professionally speaking, those organisations that come to the table from an opportunity perspective with an opportunity lens, they're the ones that embrace it. They're the ones that capture the risk, but they're also the ones that are making significant amounts of money out of it and have better metrics in terms of employee retention, customer engagement, and so forth, which are bread and butter for any business. So I think you need to frame that, but you need to obviously have it supported with data. So at a very, very simple level, if you go out to someone and say, well, listen, you're funding yourself, there's a new pool of funds there, do you want access or not? Most people will want access to
Sure.
diversified funding
And then
streams.
from
so
uni into
you could point
the
to
world of
very,
work
very
and into
hard
financial
metrics like that. You
services,
could show
tell us
performance
a bit
of
about
green
those
bonds
early
and
years
markets and
in
so forth.
the financial
Even
service
though
industry,
they were
obviously
maybe at
pre
time only
global
marginally
financial
better.
crisis, what was
But
it
again, I
like,
think when you look at
and
those
what were the
things,
roles that you
and now
started
that it's
with?
better understood, well, of course, people have embraced it in a much more welcoming way. Yeah, so I suppose, to me it's ESG and it always has been. So from a social perspective, we were seeing parts of the market that potentially were
So it started with
or
Bank of Ireland, is that
non-banked,
right?
but then we could see certain types of entities who were providing banking type services to them, like credit unions and so
understood.
forth. In Danske
and
at the time,
what do you
we had
think?
fantastic payments capability.
I looked at your career in the, I suppose,
infrastructure built around it. So an idea
the success
we
that you
was,
had,
rolling that out in
it
a
developed quite
fashion
rapidly, I
to,
suppose.
let's say, those small savings banks.
What were some of the reasons, or what would you put that success down to? You mentioned some of those leaders, but it'd be great to understand, I suppose, if there are any things that you felt really helped and aided that progression and development within your career.
Payments into those organisations. So, someone can walk down, pay their utility bills electronically, and they can access their funding and get paid, their salaries and wages and so forth. And atypically you find these, savings banks in every corner of the country and that. So, they're serving a very, very important role, but it's the expansion of services that's critical there. And by us being, let's say, the back end or the infrastructure that's sat behind it, they in turn were able to provide these new services to their customers. And do it in a very kind of socially conscious way in terms of fees and so forth. So again, it was kind of marrying the two in terms of being able to make a commercial return, whilst obviously leveraging existing resources, but it was, from a socially conscious way. And I think it's something that's there in the market today still in terms of, underbanked sectors or indeed certain component parts struggling to access credit. And I'm not necessarily thinking about, ethnic groups or anything like that. But if you look at the gig economy, we see people in the gig economy sometimes can struggle to get a mortgage. Because again, sometimes certain banks, they struggle to assess that person's profile because of the nature of their employment and so forth. So again, if you come at it from an opportunities perspective, I think there's a huge amounts of opportunities there outside of, funding the renewable transition to renewable and so forth, and those easy to spot items.
Sure. So we'll rewind a little bit. So the graduate program, and then into Bank of Ireland, and then that approach to Barclays. So firstly, what were you spoke about the fact that it went from perhaps slightly more local to something that was global with Barclays, but what did you find as other differences in the cultures as you made that initial transition across?
Absolutely, and we see it every day of the week. So, it's just about, I suppose, as you said, opening your mind a little bit and just seeing what's around you. Yes. So, unfortunately, Danske decided to do a restructure and they moved a lot of their institutional banking back to the Nordics. There was a big group-wide restructure. So I joined Bank of Ireland to help out on their institutional strategy within their markets business. So looking at, how to move to kind of new kind of trades, bring more capital markets focused on that.
Sure.
And at the same time,
you said something about
so
at your first firm and then at Barclays, you had a mentor quite early on.
Super interesting
was that something you were proactively?
The first co-benefit.
Did you proactively get that, or was that a program internally that they had? Because I talk a lot to individuals I engage with on a day-to-day basis about having a mentor and seeking that out. But what would you say are some of the practical tips as to how to do that and make sure that works?
Which was a fantastic transaction at the time. So again, we did lots of innovative type things whilst I was there. Whilst of course building out the core climate and sustainability agenda that all banks are now engaged in. Yeah, it was very broad, but what you find over it, there's a lot of crossover in these things. So sustainability and sustainable finance is definitely a growth agenda. Growth was really part of the remit. So in terms of growing new products, but also making sure that they were growing their penetration with customers and giving the right options and service, of course. So there was a lot of entanglement, or they're intertwined in that. Of course, like every job, you get pulled in different directions at certain times in that. But again, as I mentioned earlier, when I was there, much earlier in my career, fantastic people and that, really good to work with and that, and obviously quite accommodation. And again, you can see, that they're really buying into the agenda, and it's a core pillar of their strategy now. But obviously that's back to a lot of good work that was done by many people, a number of years ago in terms of setting those foundations. But yeah, like every job, my current job, no different to your job, Josh. Every day is different, and time is the enemy. There's never enough of it.
Sure, yeah, understand. And interesting. So you're the HSBC mentor who's now in leading sustainability, but you both weren't in sustainability back then. Is that right? Okay. First mover advantage and all that. Yeah, for sure. When did
Yeah,
sustainability
so
start to become something that
almost
you were
14,
aware of,
it's 14
or
years ago tomorrow. That's
realized
my
the value of,
eldest
and,
lad's
and
birthday,
thought
so he
that this
turns
was
14
something that you
tomorrow.
wanted to pivot your career
In the
into?
mill. So it's obviously a lifestyle change, sea change, and that. So I don't really remember the sleepless nights too much, which isn't a bad thing. But what I find is, I get huge enjoyment out of it, and I like spending a lot of time with them. They're super fun. But then it also opens your eyes up to how they think, how society is moving, how out of touch I'm becoming with certain trends and social media and so forth. And it's also a great grounding. So what I try and do is to make sure that I'm there in the morning for them, and to put them to bed at night. And then at the weekends, like, to be honest, I'm a taxi service, Josh. I'm driving them where they need to go, picking them up from play dates and hanging out with their pals and that. And both of them do a little bit of sports, so that's very enjoyable watching them do that. And just chatting to them afterwards. So it's I'm certainly getting more out of it than I'm putting in, if I can put it that way. And I'm very, very lucky to have a very, very supportive and understanding wife. Who does a lot of the kind of hard yards on it. But no, it's great, and it certainly keeps you grounded. But it also opens up your eyes to how society is
For
changing.
sure. So you said at the beginning it
how
was
they view
green
things,
bonds that started,
particularly when they kind of hit the
was the first of the deals
the
that you were
dreaded
looking at.
teenage
And
years.
I
It
suppose
takes on
back
a life of
then,
its own, but it's
as you say,
certainly keeps you,
it wasn't so
it
mainstream,
keeps you up
and
to
it was
date.
something that was very
Of course, it brings
innovative. What were some of
worries and
the
concerns with it as well.
on the
you'd imagine,
negative
but
side, let's
certainly
say? What were
the
some of
enjoyment
the
factor massively outweighs
issues you
everything else.
faced, or the challenges that you had when you were starting to talk more prominently about this? Because I suppose in that environment back then, it must have been a lot of challenges that you would probably be coming up against.
Yep. Yeah. Sure. So I think there's a couple of things. From a national school age, they're certainly much more educated than lots of adults. That's the first thing. They really understand it. The teachers do a fantastic job in terms of education, but they see it, and they see it for what it is. And there's no compromise, which is, nice to see. So they're not thinking through, it's like, well, you shouldn't throw litter, full stop. There's no excuses. You should put it in the bin. You should recycle. So they're much better at those types of things than lots of adults in that. And they also ask lots of questions, so they're very, very inquisitive. And I think as they get a bit older, obviously they kind of start to see kind of real world reality, that things, happen for lots of different reasons, and not always good ones. But equally, the kind of core premises there is to, they can't understand, let's say, why we don't have much more renewable energy. Like, they don't understand why we can't just build windmills. If windmills are good, why are we not building them? Why don't we have more? Why is, energy costs, not that they think of energy costs, but like, why is
For
so
sure.
expensive?
And
You know,
let's start
I remember
internally,
the
and then
government
we'll
gave,
go on to externally. So
cashback
internally, what
here
was
recently
you said
when
that
my
the
son said to
firm
me, he
was
goes, why are they giving money back?
had a sustainable mindset perhaps at that point, or at least elements of it. But what was the uptake like internally to support this, to help to bring in other resources that could
at times
deliver on these objectives?
That's super interesting.
And how did you manage that to bring sort of multifaceted teams together to help
the natural world? And they're also very, very socially conscious. So I think you can see that generational shift, which is fantastic to see. And that's so, it's great to see girls in particular playing a lot more sports that was traditionally associated with boys, and that they're getting all the things that they should be getting, and that we're starting to see real equality in a much different way.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of things. I think it's the innovation is the first thing. Everyone understands the scale and the significance of the issues at hand. We don't understand the opportunities, which I think is
for sure. Because I have conversations with people,
so it's the innovation
all the time, and even
and
now with firms where
to do things on
it's a side of desk job, because they're not willing to give it the credence or the full-time role it is. So people who are clearly very passionate about it want to do it. They're doing it in their voluntary time outside of their day-to-day job to deliver it. So back then, I suppose, to have that foresight to do it was
to drive that
something that's to be commended. What about, I suppose, the uptake from
confines of that organisation?
Not internally but externally to actually partake in this and to receive the green bond, or to be a supplier, or whatever it might have been.
They were willing to
the organisations that supported you on that journey to deliver it. Did you find that there was like-minded gusto to get this done, or was there resistance there as well?
They live and breathe it. It's a real thing. It's not just a slogan that's on the door. And they were willing to, fund that because it's expensive, and of course give me the space to go out and grow it and to start driving the agenda, in a much more significant way.
Really?
Yeah. I was quite nervous about joining because it's not my background and I don't know the industry overly well. I just know from the outside and using some services. So that was certainly a steep learning curve. I mean, obviously you're part of a partnership as well, so that's very, very different when you move from corporate. Again, a very steep learning curve. So there were certainly challenges around that. Equally, in terms of how you cross collaborate, it's just different. When you work in a bank, it's very formulaic. Everyone knows everyone. There's a kind of agreed process in that. When you work with a firm that has 300,000 employees globally, sometimes it can be actually a challenge to find the right person.
Sure. And I suppose that showcases
on your internal system.
The part that finance has to play in driving the transition.
And then I guess it
forces
being brave.
It forces that if you want that
very
funding,
reluctant
then you
at
have
the
to look
start,
down that lens and start to
don't be
consider
afraid to make the mistake
these areas that are
and certainly
that are material to the funder.
Absolutely.
But I think you mentioned to me previously that it wasn't just about the environmental side of
in the back of my mind
that you were looking at
I'm not
with this. There was also the social element, which of course still is being developed significantly now. But being socially responsible was something that gave you a competitive advantage. How did that happen?
So, I kind of even struggle with that sometimes. But it's been a fantastic learning curve. and the firm has been very, very supportive of me. And I think the other thing then as well is that we have expertise in so many things, and also you can go down whatever avenue you want. So by way of example, AI is growing and growing and growing. So we started thinking in a very real way about socially conscious AI. What does that mean? Inherent bias, all those kind of factors. So again, atypically, if you're working in a corporation, it's no, stick to your knitting. Whereas here, it's like, well, actually, if you think there's something there, go and explore it, see what you find, and again, let us help you and let us resource you. Sure. So, I mean, it's not a corporate structure. Everyone is equal. So the first thing I learned was go to the meetings. I thought, okay, it's a partnership meeting. I can miss that one. No, you're part of the partnership. And what you put into it, you get out of it. And so it's not a corporate structure. Whereas for whatever reason, I just kind of thought, well, I'm sure it's a corporate structure. Everyone has a boss type of logic, which was just quite simply wrong. So I think that for me was the first thing. The second piece is how you set up. So, there's no one going to tell you what to do. It's up to yourself. So seek advice, particularly when you don't come from that background. And again, maybe back to mentorship, look for people that you can use as a sounding board. There's nothing wrong with looking for help or asking questions, particularly when you're new to the industry and, of course, the firm itself. And as I said, everyone is so collegial in that respect and understands that you're doing it for the right reasons. So, when I look back now, and I'm here 2 years,
for sure, and I
think
this is where it becomes so.
Because I didn't know
this is what fascinates me about
I didn't
sustainability.
The
reason that I
system,
chose this space to be where we focus our attention at GS2 is because there's so many new opportunities that come from just considering things in a slightly different way. And if that wasn't looked at from the social element, then perhaps that big business opportunity and the value creation doesn't come because you're not looking at it through that lens. And I think that's where the best sustainability work happens, is when it's a win-win, and thinking about the triple bottom line and those kind of concepts are really interesting. For sure. So then after this, if I recall correctly, we had the full circle back to Bank of Ireland. So how did that role materialise after Danske, and what was your
commercial
remit
pressures
there?
All the time, particularly when you have a team. So you have commercial pressure making sure that you can pay the bills, and then you have obviously the pressure of you don't want people twiddling their thumbs. I think for me, it was being very honest at the outset to say, this is who I am and this is what I can do, and there's a learning curve here for me that I need to be able to go through. So it was by being honest and saying, I will not hit the ground running, and they were very comfortable with that. Equally, by being able to communicate that this is what I believe to be realistic targets, and again, getting the relevant support and buy-in, that this is not a short-term endeavour, that this is going to be long-term, and it won't be straight line, as in we'll have good months and we'll have quiet months. I think from a customer's perspective, absolutely agree with you. Every customer, and I was one at a point in time, is always under cost pressure. So I think there's a couple of things. I come from an old school world where if I say that's the price, that's the price. If it takes a little bit more work,
sure. So I suppose going back
and it has to be done to a very,
the
very
firm, when you've sort of gone through this journey and then sustainability has become so prominent.
So again,
what was the role and remit there? Because I think your title, I'm sure it has sustainability and growth in it. So what was the sort of split of time between the different angles, or was it all under the same area? Like how was it? What was actually the role description of what you were focused on?
Absolutely. And that you'll get it paid back at some stage. So you have to invest in people within the clients themselves. But I guess I've always kind of been a believer in that. But I think always by being very honest, being very transparent, I think that goes a huge amount of the way. And of course, clients themselves, they're under pressures, they have other demands. So you have to be understanding. And, a bit of empathy, certainly goes a long way. Sure. So obviously reporting is front and centre through CSRD, but I think the next wave is going to be nature and biodiversity. I think we see it quite clearly now coming from the regulator and also society. I think social, particularly from financial services, it's always been a tricky area, but I think now all financial services are going to have to grasp the nettle and really get a thorough understanding of it.
For sure. And I'll pause on the career part right now because, clearly, in addition to your career journey, you have a personal journey, and you mentioned earlier on that you're a father. So how has this, I suppose, career trajectory that you've been on, which has been really progressive and developed moving forward, also coincided with, I suppose, relationships, family, and balancing those two? Because, I know what it's like in the fast-paced world of growth, that it's sometimes difficult to get a good balance. How have you managed to do that throughout your career, and when did you become a father on this journey?
What if we just replicate it on historic data? Well, then we're going to repeat the mistakes of the past. There's no tolerance for that nowadays.
Happy birthday to
if you repeat the mistakes of the past, you'll also miss the opportunities, because there's only one certainty, and that's change, and society is changing at a rapid rate. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, so in relation to that, I've taken a higher subject matter first approach. So I look for subject matter experts and we hire them. So I've recently hired someone on the social side directly from the UN who's business rights. Was their area of specialism. I currently have a member of the team who's just finishing a PhD in natural capital. That's all things nature. And we have people on the team who specialise in financial services product, so they know the product inside out. And of course then people who specialise in reporting and disclosures. So by having a specialist-led approach, what we find works well is that there's a lot of crossover on engagement. So you might start on reporting, but even if you look at, let's say, CSRD,
sure.
You need
and what about from a sustainability
expertise,
perspective?
Climate expertise.
I
by
suppose
having those specialisms within the team.
I talk to people, and their children start asking them questions about their job and what they do and how it impacts society. Have you got to the point where that's at the top of conversation, and how does that change, I suppose, your view of the time you spend at work and what you're focused on?
Firm, so we can bring in other people and say, well, if you want to learn everything about nature and biodiversity, we have someone on the team that can help you grow personally and professionally. So again, that's how we've kind of taken the approach. And of course, then we have a wider network of colleagues. So, we have colleagues who specialise in deep carbon calculations and all sorts of interesting things, and who are much better educated than me. So again, tap on those resources as and when required. Yeah. Sure. So I think the first thing is that there's a massive education gap. I think, unfortunately, climate or ESG isn't sexy because it's misunderstood. And I equally think that people see it as a risk in the main as opposed to an opportunity. So it's only through education that we change that and that we start to move the narrative. And it's only actually through engagement and through education that we can show people career opportunities, a different way of doing things, and we can actually start to bring about that kind of positive change and impact that's required. Take it as read, we will not transition to the low carbon economy unless we engage directly with fossil fuels, and it has to be a just transition. So you can only do that through education. and that has to happen
Sure.
across the board. And as I said, who's doing it really, really well is the national
Sure.
schools. And what we've seen of late is a lot of the third level centres putting on a lot more courses than that. So again, that's very, very welcome. But also, it's a fast, dynamic, moving pace. So I think there's an obligation on me and my team to put our shoulders to the
For
wheel.
sure.
So
And I
do a lot
know
of
we
guest lecturing
spoke
for
before
free,
about education being a
we
key
try and
area
help
for
out on,
you in the development of the
curriculum,
sustainable mindsets. I'm going to come
development
back to
and
that,
so
but
forth.
I suppose just to
Because
finish with
it's
the
only
career
through
journey
that we
then.
in turn start to move the dial.
You've spent a lot
And
of time,
course,
obviously,
we also
in-house
find some talents there
delivering
as well, so people who've
in
done the
industry.
courses, who we can actually
So
hire.
taking that step
But I
from
really
there
think that is something
to
that when we put the
consider
time
and then
effort into
ultimately
it,
move into
that's where we start to see
consultancy is a
change,
step
and we
that
start
I
to
suppose
see
many
that change
people
permeate
make,
through
but they do it the other way
society.
around. They start in
Ignorance is a
consultancy
terrible,
and
terrible thing,
then go
and it's only
in-house.
education
What was it that
resolves
appealed
that.
to you at that point to make that move, and why, when you made that move, was it EY that was the organisation that you chose to join?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, because again, there's only so much resource, and I'm not even thinking about financial resource. I'm thinking people's day job is busy, and there's only so much time and effort people can give to things. So I think it's a well-worn phrase, but perfection is the enemy of good. So I've had some interesting conversations with clients where I say, I see what you're saying, and the reported disclosures is a huge lift in that. But can we go back to first principles? What are you disclosing on? Have you the activities to disclose? So what story do you actually have? Then let's talk about telling the story through the directive and the disclosure and so forth. But if you're not active in the space, you will have very little to say. If you're active in the space,
how have you found,
and you see it as an
one of the
opportunity,
main
and you're
conundrums
doing
I talk to
engagement,
people about
and
on a
you're
day-to-day basis
transitioning
is the
clients,
move between
you will have a
in-house and
fantastic
consulting.
story to tell. Through your
What would you say have
reporting,
been,
and it'll write
or
itself.
you've already highlighted
Sure,
a
we
couple
have
of
to
the
be
positives
compliant
of
with the guidelines and so forth,
working
but there'll be an
across a
abundance
number of different
material then,
organisations
there that you would be
and
very, very
seeing
happy to
things at
disclose
the
on.
innovative edge.
So
but what would you
I try
say
and
has
bring them
been
back
the
to,
challenges
it's about the doing,
where you're not, I suppose,
it
as
won't
able
be
to
perfect.
deliver
Everyone is
things the
learning,
whole way through, or
but
be as
then
hands-on
if
on
you go
one
at
particular
this way,
project
it
as
makes
you
it a
would
lot
be when
easier
you're
to
in-house.
tell your
How have
story,
you found that,
to
and
disclose
how do you
in an
manage
appropriate manner, in line
the
with
desire perhaps
regulation
to
and
do a
so
bit
forth?
more when
Whereas
you
if you're
perhaps
not doing
can't?
the activities, if you're stuck, very, very difficult then to write a really comprehensive disclosure, unless you're going to say that to people, which I don't think is a good outcome. Yeah, gosh, it's a difficult one to answer. I think for me, the one thing I always think of is how grateful I was for the effort and time that people gave me when I was coming through, particularly at the earlier stages. So I won't pretend to kind of think, well, it'd be great if I could change the world and deliver climate change. I'd be much happier to know that I've helped people on their professional and personal journey, that I've developed the team, that they're in a good place, that they've moved on to do much better things than I'll ever do, and that I've put the investment and the time into those people and helped them in some way to develop and to want to do much better things. And that for me would be a fantastic outcome. Absolutely. Yeah. If you contact me on LinkedIn, I'll always come back to you. Applause.
For sure. So a couple of points to tap into of what you said there. So the first, I think, will be quite interesting for those who also have not worked in consulting before. So you said, the partnership model. Tell us about a couple of the things that you first learned when you had joined that you didn't know from the outside about what does that actually mean, and how does that affect the dynamics of how you work?
Thanks, Josh. Lovely to talk to you. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I'd welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.